Hello and welcome to the second ISSEME virtual seminar of the Autumn Series 2023. Today's seminar is co-organized with INSULE, a research group on medieval England and Ireland from Brazil. It is my pleasure to introduce Kawe J. Neckel, who is in his third year of PhD studies on the History Graduate Program of the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, and will first tell us a little more about INSULE and their activities, before then introducing our speaker, Dr. Elton Oliveira Souza de Medeiros, who will talk to us about the reception and translation of Beowulf in Brazil. There will be the opportunity for questions and discussions at the end of the lecture. Now, I will give over to Kawe. Welcome. Please let us know more about INSULE. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Professor Judith, for such an excellent introduction. I would like to thank ISSEME board, especially Judith, Elise, and Thais for such an interesting invitation to the present seminars. Today, we will receive our excellent colleague, Professor Elton Oliveira Souza Medeiros, who will present us the conference Beowulf Goes South, the reception and translation of Beowulf in Brazil. I'm here as a delegate from INSULE, and before presenting our main speaker, Elton Medeiros, I would like to say a few words about INSULE as a research group that we are. We are a Brazilian research group founded in 2020 during COVID lockdown by our coordinators, Elaine Farrell and Isabella Albuquerque. Initially, the main intention of the group was to approximate Brazilian researchers interested in Britain and Ireland during Antiquity and Middle Ages. However, as the group was gaining traction, we brought under our umbrella not only established professors, but also graduate students in master's degree and PhD, like myself. Today, we have around 47 participants developing research in association with our group with a wide temporality since Iron Age until the 15th century. INSULE is a bridge between our paths and careers in medieval studies, a place where we can exchange materials and sources. The intention here is not only occupying an environment between pairs, but also to bring cohesion and horizontal connections to improve what is being published in Portuguese, and of course, to mark the field with a perspective from the Global South and from Latin America. Therefore, since 2020, we have organized an online international congress and 3 journal issues related to Ireland and British Isles in Antiquity and Middle Ages. Besides, we are connecting ourselves in joint publications and participating in events from outside Brazil, such as the ISSEME biennial meeting. Well, and one of our finest members is Elton Oliveira de Souza Medeiros. Let's introduce him then. Besides extend our gratitude for ISSEME board, we need to thank Elton for your presence here. When we speak about the studies in early medieval England in Brazil, we need to speak about Elton. He wrote the first PhD thesis defended in Brazil related to the studies of early medieval England, finalized in 2011 at the University of São Paulo. Elton today is an associate professor in medieval history at the Department of History at Federal University of Paraná. He is also a permanent professor in the graduate program in history at the same institution. He graduated in history from the Faculty of Philosophy, Languages, and Human Sciences at the University of São Paulo. In 2006, he defended his master's dissertation on the poem Beowulf and its historical and literary relationship with the medieval Northern European world. In 2011, he defended his doctoral thesis in the field of social history, also at the University of São Paulo, focusing on the analysis of Anglo-Saxon religious literature. Between 2013 and 2014, he was a visiting research fellow at the University of Winchester in England, conducting postdoctoral research focused on the study of intellectual and literary production in the early medieval English period. From 2021 and 2023, he carried another postdoctoral research, again at the Faculty of Philosophy, Languages, and Human Sciences at the University of São Paulo, regarding heroic poetic productions in Old English during the consolidation of the Kingdom of England in the 9th and the 10th centuries. Currently, he continues to conduct studies on medieval Northern Europe and dedicates himself to translating and publishing texts from that era into Portuguese. One of his notable works is Beowulf and Other Anglo-Saxon Poems, 8th century to 10th century, published by Editora 34, winner of the 2022 APCA Prize in the Literary Translation category, which he will speak a little more for us today. Thank you so much, Elton. We're looking forward in hearing more from you.
Thank you very much, Kawe, for the kind words. And I make the words of Kawe to thanks again all the people involved in all the ISSEME seminars and the possibility of this opportunity to talk about my work here for you. So thank you everyone also that's listening me today, and probably will listen this on the YouTube channel afterwards. So I prepared this a couple of slides, so I will keep on the reading of this material. So actually, it's going to help if I misspell something or not to take so long to explain, not lost in my mind on my thoughts here. So Beowulf Goes South, the reception and translation of Beowulf in Brazil. And I want to begin my presentation here actually with this quote of Hartley from the book of The Go-Between of 1953. The idea of the past is a foreign country, they do things differently there. I think I really like this the sentence, because we can think about this words when we talk about history and also about receptions, and especially when we talk about translations of a text like Beowulf. So to think about the details and how we must pay attention about this text. So talking about receptions, before I talk about my work and Beowulf in Brazil, I think it would be interesting to talk about the first reception of Beowulf we know on the Beowulf studies. It is actually the Grimmon Thorkelin translation of Beowulf. It's interesting because it was the first translation of Beowulf we know, and it was a translation to Latin. But the translation of Thorkelin is interesting also because we can notice that some of the main elements of the Beowulf studies that will follow through the 19th and 20th or early 20th century. These elements, that some glimpses of this are on the title Thorkelin chose for his translation, like The Deeds of the Danish Kings of the 3rd and 4th century, a Danish poem in Anglo-Saxon dialect. And we can see this through all the 19th and 20th century, like what I call his traditional approach, like an idea tied about Beowulf tied to the contemporary Northern European national narratives, evidence for the historical reality of this Germanic heroic age. This idea to try to deconstruction of the deconstruction of the text and the quest for the true Beowulf. Also think about Beowulf like a childish or confused work or poem, perceived as an inferior, unfinished piece composed of thematic patches, a result of inadequate authorship that didn't understand the elements of heroic pagan world. And the monomyth of the monster slayer hero, the idea of a narrative focusing on the heroic deeds of a character and their confrontation with monstrous beings. The problems we are going to find along the 19th century and 20th century. It's well known, but I will just reinforce this, will be works guided by this 19th century and 20th century national paradigms, like the use of historical context from other societies to analyze Beowulf, like, for example, the Scandinavia of the 13th century. Little or no concern at all for the historical literary context of the Anglo-Saxon period based on existing evidence. At the same time, the poem is seen as a sort of historical anthropological evidence for the reality of Northern European societies in early Middle Ages. And, of course, problematic studies and translations containing anachronisms and or teleologisms. And the middle of the 20th century, the two main works that will change this vision from at least from this 19th century paradigms are the most famous, the essay of Tolkien, The Monster and the Critics, that will try bring us this idea of Beowulf as an artistic work of its historical time, and that the poem is not a pseudo-historical or anthropological account. And also, I think so important as Tolkien essay, the essay of The Audience of Beowulf from Dorothy Whitelock from the 60s, where she brought us these questions like, who was the audience of Beowulf and why it was important to the people of that time? And the idea that the most problems in the poem actually were just made up by the critics and researchers of the poem. So we can say that there was this thematic threshold on the middle of the 20th century that will change the vision we are going to have about the poem from just a childish monster hero narrative to something much more complex, that it's possible to talk about historical mentalities, royal wars, dynastic, panegyric, gender, and etc. And all that said, what I want to say today is something about, okay, but why care about Beowulf today? And why does it matter in Brazil? Or why Brazil cares about Beowulf? Well, the short answer would be, why not? But the longer answer is something like this. Well, to begin with, I take here an approach, I really like it, from the essay of Andrew Shell from his work from last year, the Beowulf poem, where he brought us this idea of a humanist Beowulf, idea of a work, a poem, sharing, as in other literary works, the contemplation of values and inquiries into the larger order of human existence. The idea that the lives of human beings subjected to the institutional forces of society and history, and the quest for existential and metaphysical answers to the human experience in this modern year. So, we are talking here about receptions. Yeah, I think one of the main forms of receptions, especially in an academic environment, is the translations. So the idea of these translations of a text like Beowulf actually are going to deal with this conflict between a poem in an archaic Germanic language, the worldview of a society dating back to a mythical time, and a modern audience. It's almost impossible it's an almost impossible task to prevent the world and the era surrounding us from influencing the translation, and conversely, it is also almost impossible not to be influenced by the poem. So we can say we are talking here about two main things, that's memory and the transformation of this memory. So the significance of each translation of the poem represents the awakening of interest in a generation that takes the effort to preserve and adapt it to their worldview. Each reader is interested in Beowulf not only to understand the poem, but also there is some fascination with the narrative of a mythical medieval North Atlantic by a post-industrial and digital society. The uniqueness that each translation carries for the audience of its time brings forth a poem that slyly drags us into its depths, like Grendel's mother, transforming ourselves as well as being transformed with each reading. And here we come to Beowulf in Brazil. My translation was not the first time Beowulf appears in Brazil. And it's very interesting because actually the first time Beowulf set foot in Brazilian lands was by a comic book from the 50s. The first time, Beowulf made its debut in Portuguese through a comic book called Epopeia. That's the image of the cover of this magazine. It was a magazine from Rio de Janeiro, and it was a sort of pulp magazine for Brazilian children and teenagers. Originally, an Italian work by Enrico Bassari, translated anonymously, titled O Monstro de Caim, in English, The Monster of Cain, and published in January of 1955. This adaptation in Portuguese comic adds a distinctive twist to the Beowulf narrative. Among all the versions inspired by the poem, spanning books, films, and comics, this one stands out as the most imaginative and weird we can we will find. So I bring you here the first page of the comic, and I will try to bring you just a glimpse of what's about this adaptation of comic book. So the reconstruction of Beowulf's history, possibly influenced by translations from Sharon Turner and Giuseppe Pecchio, is markedly distorted compared to the original poem. The narrative we can see here, well, the imagery is very interesting because you can see this very Wagnerian style with like Vikings with helmets with horns and the shields with this strange runic inscriptions. And the narrative is something like this. The narrative starts with the pagan Roger, that means King Hrothgar, and the murdering of his Christian brother Edio, that should be Ecgtheow, in a land dispute fueled by the evil spirit of Grendel. And we can see Grendel here, his big head here, like some sort of evil genie, something like this. So afterwards in the history, Beowulf, as the son of the slain king, is compelled to serve Roger to repay for the funeral rites. Roger, fearing Beowulf's ascent to the throne, sends cryptic runic messages instructing him to kill Grendel. And you can see on the middle of the page, this runic inscription actually is just regular Latin alphabet, just it's trying to imitate runic inscriptions. Afterwards, Grendel intercepts the message, vowing to kill Beowulf and mentioning the magical power of his mother, Froda, that's created on this adaptation. Beowulf then and Grendel, influenced by Froda's protective magic, engage in a distant confrontation. During the fight, Beowulf's Christian blood nullifies the pagan magic of Grendel, enabling him to decapitate Grendel. So we can see in the end of this page when Beowulf decapitates Grendel, because now the evil magic of Grendel was nullified by the Christian blood of Beowulf. Presenting Grendel's head to King Roger, the story takes a dramatic turn. Roger becomes a penitent monk, relinquishing his kingdom to Gunnar. And who is Gunnar? I don't know. And then after he brought the head of Grendel, the tale concludes with the dying Beowulf being carried to the heavens by a chorus of angels and seated on the throne, on the Thor's throne. And here we can see it. Here is Beowulf from the beginning, on the first part, on the Thor's throne, and we know it's because there's really weird runes that resemble something else from the 40s. And in the end, Beowulf is carried by the angels to heaven and ends the story of Beowulf, or the monster of Cain. Well, the narrative's complete distortion of the original poem is evident, showcasing reimagined Beowulf filled with altered characters, motivations, and a drastically revised conclusion and imagery. The second time Beowulf appears in Brazil actually was just on the 90s, specifically in 1992. It was the Ari Gonzalez Galvão translation of Beowulf. Galvão proposed to produce the first complete translation of Beowulf into Portuguese in 3 verses. Despite its merit, the translation presents some issues. Galvão's translation, while capturing the sense of the poem, mirrors 19th century translations and occasionally incorporates anachronistic terms reminiscent of medieval chivalric epics rather than the North European setting of Beowulf. Like he used idea of castles, knights, barons, dukes, and something that like this, as if Beowulf was actually almost part of the round table. The most significant problem in Galvão's work lies in the poem's verses. Galvão's translation concludes with exactly 3,129 verses. The omission of 53 verses raises questions about the narrative integrity and its validity as a full translation. The third time Beowulf appears in Brazil, and the second time as a proposal of translation, was in 2007. Ericas Ramalho launched the first complete translation of Beowulf into Portuguese, surpassing the earlier attempt by Galvão. Ramalho's translation aims to imbue the Portuguese text with an elevated tone, translating the Anglo-Saxon poem into decasyllabic verses, making it very similar to the Shakespearean works. This stylistic choice, while interesting, results in a translation that's peculiar and anachronistic. His decision to emphasize poetic aesthetics brings a unique flavor to the Portuguese rendition, but comes at the expense of aligning closely with the semantic nuances of the original Beowulf, highlighting the inherent tension between stylistic choices and reliable representation. The fourth time we are going to have Beowulf in Brazil, and the second this time as an adaptation, is on the work of Marco Aurélio, called in Portuguese A Saga de Beowulf, or in English, The Saga of Beowulf. And this adaptation is very, very interesting because the author tried to adapt the story of Beowulf of what we call here in Brazil cordel literature, a very traditional literary style from the northeast of Brazil, especially from the countryside of northeast of Brazil, that we can identify like this cordel literature are always in poetic form, and always followed by illustrations made of woodcut. So what we see on the Marco Aurelius adaptation is trying to transform Beowulf, the narrative of Beowulf, in this cordel literature, and also trying to imitate these woodcut illustrations of the main points of the story. And what I brought you here are the original text of Marco Aurelius, the Portuguese text, and by his side an attempt of my own, or to translate it to English, just for you have a glimpse, have an idea of the work of what Marco Aurelius had done. And So what I show you here are the opening lines of the adaptation of Marco Aurelio. So it said something like this: "May the poetry of the bards illuminate my mind, so that I may speak of a valiant warrior in a fantastic adventure that thrilled many a kind. However, to commence, we shall speak of a monarch, the renowned Hrothgar, who left his mark in the land of the Danes in the present-day Denmark. The battlements of the palace delivered him from danger, from the insane storms, from the fury of foes, but they couldn't restrain the worst among the torments. The torment answered to the name of Grendel, an anthropomorphic giant, a cruel murderer whose wickedness cannot be described on paper." And you can see I brought you also here some example of this woodcut art that tries to imitate our real woodcut illustrations. It's magnificent, this adaptation of Marco Aurelio. And at last but not the least, my own translation in of 2022. And I bring you here as the original opening lines of Beowulf, my original translation to Portuguese. And I try to do this translation to English, actually just for you to have this vision of some elements I try to brought to Beowulf. Like, first of all, it's a prose translation, and I didn't try at all any attempts of versification or trying a stylistic, more artistic adaptation. So my adaptation into English would sound something like this: "Listen, we have heard of the glory of the Danish warriors of days of yore, of the kings of the tribe, of how those princes did deeds of courage. Many times Shushethn took the mid-halls from the enemy troops of many tribes, terrorized warriors, even though he was initially alone. For this he obtained assistance and grew under the heavens, thrilled with great honor, until each of the nations along the coast, beyond the whale's path, had submitted and paid tribute. He was a good king." So specifically talking about my translation, well, I think it's quite clear by this point. I didn't try to do any adaptation in the terms of verse or poetic style. It was a very plain translation to Portuguese. And now I will try to explain why I did this. Well, first of all, this translation was part of a long translation project, nearly a decade of research. This translation of Beowulf initiated during my postgraduate studies at the University of São Paulo during my master's research. It aims to be a comprehensive resource for both those casually exploring the poem and those delving into detailed study. And we can say, yes, I did something tailored for Portuguese Brazilian readers. Hence, the poem is presented in prose, departed from the original verse format. And this idea of a poem in prose, actually, I thought was to provide a clear understanding of Beowulf, especially considering the challenges posed by the Old English heroic poetry's characteristics, such as hyperbole, redundancies, digressions, notably alliterations. At the same time, I try to keep the original essence, let's say. While transitioning to prose, efforts were made to maintain the original rhythm. Truncated periods and anacoluthons were retained when possible, preserving the narrative's cadence. And just, I think it's important to say, I based my translations on the editions of Frederick Kleber, Eliot von Kirkcaldy, and Bruce Mitchell and Fred Robinson. And why I did this translation in prose? Well, I must confess that this decision in the beginning, I was thinking to do a verse translation, at least three verse translations. But in the end, I decided to prose And what was the main point for my decision was the essay of Tolkien's on translating Beowulf. And three main points called to my mind when I did this decision. That was, no translation, no matter how good it may be, can replace reading the original text. Many words from the poem no longer exist in English, and their meaning lacks suitable modern equivalents, what makes all more difficult for a Neo-Latin language as Portuguese. Accordingly, for Tolkien, the best form for a Beowulf translation would be prose, allowing the reader a more comprehensive experience and understanding of the poem. And here we come to a very, very common question in Brazil about my translation, that is, but does reading a text like Beowulf in prose, it was originally written in verse, not diminish or detract from the reading experience? Well, it's important to remember that every translation, whether in prose or verse, is an adaptation. The true reading experience of a text like this only occurs with the reading of the original. Therefore, the choice to read a translation in prose or verse depends on the reader's interests and intentions. So on this struggle between prose versus poetry, translating a work like Beowulf, transforming a poetic text into prose, does not negate the fact that the original work remains a poem. The effort to translate the poem while attempting to replicate its poetic structure is admirable. However, in some of these translations, there are evident passages where the phonetic similarity of a word led the translators to employ overly archaic vocabulary that does not align with the context of the work. Consequently, in favor of the sound of a word, the poetic essence of the poem's universe was sacrificed, leading to a mischaracterization. But I'm not opposed to verse translation of Beowulf. I really like, for example, the Shima's Heine, but I think it's important to highlight this kind of elements. So, translating poetry or any other type of text with a predominant focus on sounds and rhythms while subordinating semantics to the rhythms of matter constitutes a conscious disregard for what is more important, or should be important. While metric translations can excel as poetry, it does not necessarily guarantee their quality as translations. Metric translations can be excellent as poetry. However, these do not automatically mean quality in conveying the original text's meaning. So, to finish my presentation, I can say that there is no problem, I think, as I just said, of verse translations of Beowulf. It depends on, again, it's choices of the translator and what kind of reception he intends to. I tried to adapt Beowulf on prose to, let's say, make Beowulf popular in Brazil. But I can say also Beowulf is too big for just prose, or to this debate restrict to just prose or poetry format. And I think we can say that, especially after the mid of 20th century, Beowulf, every generation has perceived something different on it. So I think we can finish my presentation with paraphrasing Saint Augustine of Hippo from his work Confessions, but adapting this to Beowulf. And maybe we can say that Beowulf, the narrative of Beowulf, as a work of poetry from the early medieval England, the potency of its narrative is prodigious. It's vast, of monumental proportions. Who can truly explore its depths? So I finish here my speech. Thank you very much. And I'm open for further questions that may appear here. Thank you very much.